One moment of anger. One decision behind the steering wheel. Dozens of innocent passengers trapped inside a moving bus with nowhere to run. What should have been an ordinary trip from Onitsha to Lagos became a deadly journey that ended with one man losing his life, not because of an accident, not because of armed robbers, but because the driver himself allegedly chose revenge over reason. During police interrogation, the driver would later say just a few chilling words: "I didn't know him before that day." It was uncontrollable anger. Those words would leave investigators asking a disturbing question. How does a simple argument between two strangers become so dangerous that a commercial bus carrying innocent people is turned into a weapon? It all began before sunrise at the busy Upper Iweka Motor Park in Onitsha, Anambra State. Like every other morning, the park was alive with the familiar sounds of interstate travel. Conductors shouted destinations. Hawkers squeezed through the crowd, selling bottled water, snacks, and phone chargers. Families hugged loved ones goodbye. Some passengers quietly whispered prayers before stepping onto the bus, hoping for nothing more than a safe journey to Lagos. Waiting among the line of vehicles was an Abia City Mass Transit bus. Behind the steering wheel sat Ifeanyi Okwuaja, an experienced interstate driver. Every passenger who climbed aboard placed their lives in his hands without a second thought. That is what every traveler does. They trust that the person driving them will put safety above everything else. Sitting in the front passenger seat was another traveler, an ordinary man heading to Lagos like everyone else. He had never met the driver before that morning. He had no history with him. No old quarrel. No family dispute. They were complete strangers whose lives had crossed by pure chance. But sometimes, chance is all it takes. Before the bus had even escaped the traffic and noise of Onitsha, a disagreement broke out between the two men. It was nothing extraordinary at first. The kind of argument heard every day inside commercial buses across Nigeria. Perhaps it was about luggage. Perhaps it was about change. Maybe it was simply the way one of them spoke to the other. Whatever the cause, voices quickly became louder. The driver grew visibly angry. He began making threats, raising his voice above the sound of the engine. Passengers turned to look, hoping the argument would end as quickly as it had started. The man in the front seat refused to react. He remained calm. To him, the driver's words sounded like empty threats, the kind frustrated transport workers make every day without ever acting on them. He believed that once the journey settled into the open highway, the anger would disappear and everyone would move on. He had no idea the man holding the steering wheel had no intention of letting it go. The bus rode across the Niger Bridge and entered Delta State. Soon, it was racing towards Benin in Edo State. Outside, traffic flowed normally. Thick forests lined the highway. Heavy trucks rumbled in both directions. Inside the bus, however, something had changed. Most of the passengers had settled into the journey. Some closed their eyes and drifted to sleep. Others stared silently through the windows as the kilometers slipped by. But while everyone else was traveling towards Lagos, the driver appeared to be traveling somewhere much darker. Instead of focusing on the road ahead, he was allegedly replaying the argument over and over in his mind. Every passing kilometer seemed to feed his anger instead of calming it. The silence inside the cabin hid a dangerous storm building behind the steering wheel. The passengers believed they were in safe hands. They had no idea that, in just a short time, an ordinary interstate journey would become the scene of a horrifying act that would shock the entire country. But if the passengers believed the worst was already behind them, they couldn't have been more wrong. As the bus approached the outskirts of Benin, an uneasy calm settled inside the cabin. The shouting had stopped. The argument was over, or so everyone believed. Passengers in the back relaxed into their seats. Some had already fallen asleep. Others stared quietly through the windows as the scenery rolled by. To them, the silence meant the driver had finally cooled down. No one realized that, according to investigators, something far more dangerous was unfolding behind the steering wheel. The bus continued along the Benin bypass, one of Nigeria's busiest highways. Like many major roads across the country, it carried its own dangers. Heavy trucks, broken-down vehicles, and unexpected obstacles were all part of the journey. Every experienced commercial driver knew that staying alert could mean the difference between life and death. Then, up ahead, came one of those familiar hazards. Parked on the side of the road was a broken-down tipper truck. It wasn't moving. Its heavy steel body stood like a wall beside the highway. Under normal circumstances, a trained driver would begin slowing down long before reaching it. A quick glance at the mirrors. A gentle turn of the steering wheel. A safe pass. That is exactly what passengers would expect from someone trusted with their lives. But this journey was about to take a terrifying turn. Investigators would later allege that Ifeanyi Okwuaja saw the truck clearly. Yet instead of slowing down, they say the bus continued towards it at speed. There was no obvious attempt to brake. No clear effort to steer safely away from the obstacle. Then, in a single horrifying moment, the bus veered towards the stationary truck. The next few seconds were pure violence. A deafening crash ripped through the highway. The sound of twisting metal echoed through the air as the passenger side of the bus slammed into the solid steel frame of the broken-down tipper. Windows exploded into thousands of sharp pieces. Steel folded in on itself. The force of the impact tore through the front of the vehicle with terrifying speed. The man sitting beside the driver absorbed the worst of it. The same passenger who had argued with the driver hours earlier was struck by the full force of the collision. He suffered catastrophic injuries and died at the scene before help could arrive. For everyone else inside the bus, survival became a desperate fight. Sleeping passengers were thrown violently from their seats. Bodies crashed into metal rails and shattered windows. Children cried out in fear. Adults screamed for help as dust, broken glass, and twisted pieces of the bus filled the air. Luggage burst open and scattered across the floor. Blood mixed with shattered plastic and splintered metal as survivors struggled to understand what had just happened. Only moments earlier, they had been ordinary travelers heading to Lagos. Now they were victims of one of the most shocking highway tragedies imaginable. People who had simply bought a ticket for a routine interstate journey suddenly found themselves trapped inside a wrecked bus, injured, terrified, and fighting to escape. On the side of that expressway, confusion gave way to horror as survivors looked around and realized that one passenger was gone forever, while many others would carry the physical and emotional scars of that morning for the rest of their lives. What happened next would leave investigators asking a question that would shape the entire case. Was this a terrible road accident, or something far more disturbing? But the horror on that highway was only the beginning. As the dust slowly settled over the wreckage, the air was filled with cries for help. Injured passengers screamed in pain. Some struggled to free themselves from the twisted metal. Others searched desperately for family members and fellow travelers. What had started as an ordinary trip had become a scene of unimaginable devastation. Then came another shocking twist. Instead of staying behind to help the victims, the driver disappeared from the scene. According to investigators, Ifeanyi Okwuaja fled shortly after the crash, leaving behind the damaged bus, the dead passenger, and the many injured people who desperately needed help. Rather than waiting for the authorities or assisting emergency responders, he traveled towards his hometown in Imo State. For a brief moment, he may have believed he had escaped. But the tragedy had already attracted the attention of law enforcement. News of the fatal crash spread quickly, and investigators began tracing the driver. It wasn't long before police operatives tracked him to Ahiazu Mbaise, where he was arrested and taken into custody to answer for what had happened on the Benin bypass. The confident driver who had left Onitsha that morning now found himself sitting inside a police interrogation room, facing detectives and the weight of a criminal investigation. One question stood above every other. Why? Why would a disagreement inside a commercial bus end with one passenger dead and many others seriously injured? During questioning, investigators say the driver admitted that he had never known the passenger before that day. Reflecting on what had happened, he said, "I didn't know him before that day. It was uncontrollable anger." Those few words would become one of the most haunting parts of the case. But for the victims and their families, those words could change nothing. They could not bring back the man who lost his life. They could not erase the pain of those who survived with broken bones, life-changing injuries and emotional scars. They could not undo the fear experienced by passengers who simply boarded a bus expecting to arrive safely in Lagos. In the end, this case became more than the story of a fatal highway crash. It became a painful reminder of what can happen when anger is allowed to take control. A few moments of rage were enough to destroy lives, leave families grieving, and place one man at the center of a case that would be remembered far beyond that stretch of highway.